Welcome to My Vote Counts. I'm your host, Neva Civilis, Director of Public Engagement for the Michigan Department of State. My Vote Counts is a weekly series that aims to empower Michigan residents with the latest information regarding the election and voting laws in our state. Today's topic of discussion will be voting rights and voting safety. Joining me to facilitate today's discussion is the Michigan Department of State own legal expert, Keela Crane, Deputy Director of Legal. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have a question at any time during this presentation, please feel free to drop it in the chat, or I should say chat, Q&A, and we will attempt to answer it before the end of our presentation. All right, so let's get started with michigan.gov/vote, which is our one-stop shop for all things voting in Michigan. There you can register to vote, update your ballot information, or you can view your ballot information and track it. You can check your registration status. You can view a sample ballot, which some of us all need to do, and you can find your local clerk information. So, what is coming up in the next 2 weeks? On Tuesday, November 8th, that's our statewide general election in Michigan. So again, with remembering that November 8th is our statewide general election, we have a few dates we want you to remember as well. One, Friday, November 4th by 5 p.m. That is the deadline, the actual deadline to request an absentee ballot to be mailed to you. It's also the deadline to spoil your absentee ballot and request a new one. On Monday, November 7th, up until 4 p.m., you can vote early in person with an absentee ballot at your city or township clerk's office. And on Election Day, November 8th, by 8 p.m., you can return your signed absentee ballot by hand to a drop box or your local clerk's office. And you can also register to vote or update voter registration in person at your city or township clerk's office. And now, what's happening in the 2 weeks leading up to Election Day? So 14 days to Election Day. We want to remind everyone that eligible citizens can register to vote and update voter registration in person at their local clerk's office. Absentee voting continues. Voters can also request an absentee ballot at their local clerk's office through Monday, November 7th at 4 p.m. Election workers complete training. Local clerks will conduct training for individuals they will have hired to serve as election inspectors. Clerk's office open to the weekend before November 8th. Most local clerks will hold special weekend office hours before the election for voters who need to update their registration, request an absentee ballot, or change their vote. And last, pre-processing begins 2 days before Election Day in eligible communities. Per a recent change to state law, election officials in jurisdictions with at least 10,000 residents can begin preparing absentee ballots for tabulation on Election Day. And now, without further ado, and you also, at this point in time, I'd like to introduce Keela Crane, our Deputy Legal Director, and she's going to begin continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Neva. So how to return your absentee ballot. So you have one of three ways to be able to return your absentee ballot. By mail, it was the recommended date yesterday to return your absentee ballot via mail, October 24th. You can submit it through a designated drop box by 8 p.m. on Election Day, or you can take it to your local clerk's office, your city clerk or your township clerk. Also, it must be received in their office by 8 p.m. on Election Day. Who can help you return your absentee ballot? So we want to highlight a couple of things here. One, a person beside yourself can only return your absentee ballot by your request. And then secondly, there are only certain groups of people that can return your absentee ballot. A member of your same household, an immediate family member, a professional mail carrier, a person from the United States Postal Service, or a deputized election official. If a person is not in one of those 4 categories, they cannot touch your absentee ballot and submit it back to the local clerk's office. So if you would like to track your absentee ballot, you can go to michigan.gov/vote and you can track to see when your absentee ballot has been issued to you and has been received by your local clerk's office. If you look on the graphic, if you're able to see the graphic on this slide, it tells you about the election date. And then it also tells you when your application was received. And there's 2 slots available to say when your absentee ballot was sent to your home and when it was received back at the local clerk's office. If you have yet to receive your absentee ballot, if you have submitted your application and you have not received your ballot as of yet, you can confirm that your absentee ballot was indeed, your absentee ballot application was indeed received by your local clerk's office by going back to michigan.gov/vote, like we showed you on the previous screen. You also want to verify that your address is accurate with your local clerk's office. And then you can check to see whether or not your absentee ballot has been mailed out to you. You can do all 3 of those things on michigan.gov/vote. We also want to tell you about emergency absentee ballot requests. If you were planning to vote in person and something happens to you after 5 p.m. on the Friday before Election Day, so something happens to you after November 4th at 5 p.m., you can request an emergency absentee ballot. So you have to complete an emergency absentee ballot application and submit that back to your local clerk's office. From then, your local clerk, a deputy clerk, or another election official will transmit the ballot to you for completion. There are many different people who can qualify for an absentee ballot, emergency absentee ballot. So if a voter has become physically disabled, if there was a family death or illness that requires you to leave your community on or around Election Day, if your voter has been hospitalized or quarantined, or if the voter was recently incarcerated, but they have not been sentenced. So if you would like to change your vote, if you wanted to spoil your ballot or change your vote, you have to submit a written and signed request that must be received by your local clerk's office by 5 p.m. the Friday before Election Day, which would be November 4th. Now, if you have already submitted your absentee ballot, you must complete and submit your new absentee ballot in person at the clerk's office. But if you had not already submitted your ballot to the clerk's office, then you can come to the clerk's office, bring your former absentee ballot, present that to the clerk along with your written and signed statement, and the clerk can either issue you another one right there in person or have it mailed to your home for you to complete at home. So however you receive that ballot, of course, it must be returned to the local clerk's office by Election Day at 8 p.m. So we're now going to go over some of your voting rights here in the state of Michigan. As a registered voter, your right to vote is protected by both federal and state constitutional provisions, as well as federal and state statutes. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those. While this is not a comprehensive list of all of the various laws and constitutional provisions that protect your right to vote. So as we stated, under both our Michigan State Constitution of 1963, as well as a federal constitution, you have various rights. So under our state constitution in Article 2, Section 4, you have the right to a secret ballot, the right to automatically vote, register to vote, and to register to vote on election day. You have the ability to register to vote at 17 and a half, to vote a straight ticket. This is where our no excuse absentee ballot right comes into play, as well as the requirement to complete statewide audits. All of those are in our state constitution. On the federal side, there are various provisions that also protect our right to vote. The equal opportunity to vote in the 14th Amendment, the prohibition of discrimination based on race is the 15th Amendment. The prohibition of discrimination based on gender is the 19th Amendment. And also the federal constitution prevents poll tax, and that's the 24th Amendment. And then finally, in the 26th Amendment, we lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So these are just a group of the rights that are enshrined in those constitutions. So again, who can register to vote in our state? As we've stated throughout this series, 4 groups. You have to be a United States citizen. You must be a Michigan resident for at least 30 days. You must be at least 17 and a half to register, but of course you must be 18 on or before election day to cast your ballot. And you cannot be currently serving a sentence in jail or in prison and to vote in our state. While that is, those are the rules on who can register, there are certain groups of people who may find it a bit difficult to register to vote, and we want to make sure that we clear up any of those issues. So according to our state law, eligible citizens must be a resident of Michigan in order to vote. However, if you are housing insecure, you are still eligible to register to vote and vote in our state. When you are completing your voter registration application, you can put as your address where you currently shelter. So whether that may be a street location, you want to put the corner where you may be sheltering. If you're actually in a shelter, or if you're at an alternative location, such as a house of worship, you can put the address for those places as well for those people who may be housing insecure. Remember, since we are now in 2 weeks prior to election day, if you are wanting to register to vote, you must go to your local clerk's office in order to do so. We also know that some of our residents who are overseas or members of the military can also register to vote. And there's a special voter registration application for you to register and indicate that you would like to vote in Michigan. We also want to remind all of you that returning citizens automatically receive their right to vote upon exiting prison after serving their sentence. As well, people who are incarcerated in jail prior to sentence are also eligible to vote, so long as they meet all the other qualifications of being a Michigan resident, a US citizen, as well as at least 18 years of age or older on election day to vote. So we want to make sure that you're providing that clarification for any returning citizen. So what are some of your rights at the polling location? You continue to have rights at the polling location as a Michigan voter. You have the right to vote at your polling location if you are in line at 8 p.m. on election day. No matter how long it takes for you to vote, so long as you are in line at 8 p.m., you are eligible to vote. You are also eligible to be issued a regular ballot if you are not able to or do not have acceptable photo ID. You can complete what we call the affidavit of identity, and you will be able to be issued a regular ballot. You also, under the Help America Vote Act, have the right to be issued a provisional ballot if there is a question on whether or not you were in the correct precinct when you showed up on election day. All three of those rights are available to you as a Michigan voter. So provisional ballots, as I stated, comes out of the Help America Vote Act. And so if you go to your polling location and the election inspector cannot find you in the e-poll book, you do have the right to vote via a provisional ballot. What happens then is that you will vote the provisional ballot. It will not be tabulated at that time. It'll be taken back to the clerk's office to verify that you were in the correct location. Once the clerk is able to verify that, then and only then will that vote be counted. However, there are other options for you so that you don't have to vote a provisional ballot. You can right now go to michigan.gov/vote to ensure you know your correct polling location. You also have the option of same-day voter registration. Should you not be registered in the jurisdiction in which you reside, you can go visit your local clerk's office right now or even on election day and apply to be registered in your jurisdiction, and you can actually vote right there at the local clerk's office via an absentee ballot. Or if you have moved within the past 60 days prior to the election, you can go back to your former location and vote, or you can vote in your new location and update your address right there at the polling location. So there's many opportunities for you to be able to vote a regular ballot at your polling location if you go through one of those three steps. Also, all Michigan voters have the right to vote independently and privately with or without assistance. And this applies to no matter how you vote in our state, whether you're voting an absentee ballot or an accessible absentee ballot. If you are using the Voter Assist Terminal, the VAT, at election day on election day at your polling location, if you are voting curbside at your polling location, or if you choose to have an assistant to join you at the polling location to help you with site issues, or if you're needing translation issues, you have the right to do so. Again, you can have anybody to assist you with completing your ballot except two categories of persons. If that person is an employer of yours, or if they are representative of a labor union, they cannot help you with exercising your right to vote on election day. In Michigan, we want to make sure that all persons are able to vote, whether or not they have limited English proficiency. However, with the Voting Rights Act, there are certain communities in our state that are legally required to translate all election materials, including ballots, into additional languages than English. So there are three jurisdictions in our state that are required to translate their ballots into Spanish. That is Clyde Township, Covert Township, and Fenville City. The city of Hamtramck is also required under the Voting Rights Act to translate all election materials into Bengali as well. There are other communities who can elect to translate ballots and other election materials in additional languages to serve their community. And the cities of Dearborn and Hamtramck have done so to translate ballots into Arabic, and that is of their ability. But those first four locations have to translate those ballots due to the Voting Rights Act. So lastly, we want to talk a little bit about voter intimidation. And you have the right to be free from intimidation, harassment, and threats as you are carrying out your right to vote. So what is voter intimidation? It is illegal to interfere with any voter's right to cast their ballot or participate in the election process. And some intimidation may include, but is not limited to, individuals who are not election workers or election officials that ask voters for personal information or documentation about their ability to cast their ballot at that polling location. It can be intimidation to photograph or videotape voters without their consent, to block entrances into polling locations, to clerk's offices, or absentee ballot drop boxes, to harass or question voters, or to disseminate false or misleading information. All of that can be voter intimidation. And if you feel as if you're being intimidated or anybody is trying to interfere or impede your ability to cast your ballots, we have a couple of numbers that we will provide you later in this conversation to contact. Another issue that we want to address is voter suppression. It is similar, but not necessarily the same as in voter intimidation. And voter suppression is the attempt to block or prevent a voter to exercise their ballot, particularly from certain communities. And voter suppression can be created in many different forms, such as disseminating misinformation into a particular community, sending out leaflets or flyers that misinform voters about how to cast their ballots, disseminating robocalls that provide threatening or misinformation, trying to persuade voters from doing something that is contrary to the election rules. Also, the placement of billboards or posters in certain community with threatening material or just information that may not be widespread across all communities that may be preventing people from coming out to exercise their right to vote. Voter intimidation, as we talked about on the previous slide, can be also a form of voter suppression. And again, it is against the law to commit voter intimidation and suppression, and it is punishable under state and federal law. And we want to talk also about misinformation and disinformation. There's a lot of conversation in the news currently about both of these. So we just wanted to give you some definitions that we're using here at the department. So misinformation is false information that may not be deliberate in its intent to influence a public opinion or intentionally mislead or dissuade others from exercising their right to vote. However, disinformation is just the opposite. It is false information that is deliberately spread in order to influence public opinion or to intentionally mislead or dissuade others from exercising their right to vote. So if you are experiencing or have seen or heard about any type of disinformation, voter intimidation, or voter suppression tactics in your communities, we want you to contact the National Election Protection Hotline, which is 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And there are professionals there that will be able to answer the call and provide you correct information based upon Michigan law, but also track the types of disinformation or voter intimidation issues in your community and may escalate those to appropriate authorities. Secondly, if you are witnessing or experiencing intimidation, you can also contact your local or state officials or the Bureau of Elections here in the Department of State so that we can know about that as well. You can also email us at misinformation@michigan.gov so that we can have that recorded. If you find that there is threatening or violent actions that are occurring at your polling location, it is that time that you may want to contact law enforcement so that they may be apprised and be able to handle the situation. You should be not trying to diffuse any type of violence yourself. You should leave that to local law enforcement. Law enforcement officials on the state and local level have been working throughout the year with the Department of State, the Attorney General's office, and others to ensure that we have a smooth and transparent election day and the days leading up to election day as well. And Sarah just dropped these in the chat for you, but these are several election protection hotline numbers, one in English and then also in other languages, Spanish, Arabic, and then there's one for API that is a host of languages spoken on the Asian continent. And so you can go and call any of those and speak to someone in a language in which you are most proficient to get the assistance that you may need. And of course, we don't want to leave you with just some of the bad information or the negative parts of our voting experience. We want you to go and empower your community to get involved all the way up through November 8th. So here are a couple of do's and don'ts, and I'll turn it over to Neva to carry us through. Neva?
Thanks, Keela. So let's start with the do column. Number one, do educate voters on their rights and options for participating in an election. Do help registered voters make a plan to vote. Very, very important. Also, do help other eligible citizens register to vote. Do provide registered voters with an absentee ballot application. And last, from our do column, do share accurate information about elections. Now, our don'ts. Don't attempt to influence someone's vote in exchange for goods or services. Don't collect and/or return another voter's absentee ballot application or absentee ballot. Exclusions apply for members of the same household, immediate family members, mail carriers, and deputized election officials. And our last don't assist with or translate another voter's ballot without their consent. You can't help a voter with their ballot if you are or represent their employer or labor union representative. And now, most important that we want everyone to remember, please make a plan to vote. Help ensure registered voters in your community do the same. By number one, verify your voter information at our one-stop shop, michigan.gov/vote. Update your voter registration at your local clerk's office leading up to and on election day. Number two, choose where to vote. At a home or at your clerk's office with an absentee ballot or on election day at your polling place. And number three, vote. We can't stress that enough. If voting absentee, request and return your absentee ballot by 8 p.m. on election day. If voting in person, visit your polling place between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. And remember, if you're in line by 8 p.m., you can vote. And another thing, help us stop the spread of misinformation. And you can do that by preparing for and pre-bunk false information. Refer to trusted sources for verified, nonpartisan information. Visit michigan.gov/SOS Partners in Democracy for additional materials. Verify information before sharing. Again, for additional information, visit michigan.gov/SOS fact check. And also, only share accurate information from trusted sources. If you see something on social media that looks off or untrue, don't share it. Please don't. If you may know it's not entirely accurate, but others may not. So if you encounter misinformation about elections, we are asking that you report it to misinformation@michigan.gov. And now it's time for our Q&A session. Keela, again, thank you so much for all that important information. Very, very important leading up to the last 2 weeks before our statewide election day in Michigan. And so we have quite a few questions for you. And I'm gonna start off with, what else is considered voter intimidation and what should I do if I see it?
Sure. It really just kind of depends on the context, right? For intimidation, we listed a few categories of what intimidation can be on the previous slide, so I refer you to that. But most importantly, we want you to contact the National Election Protection Hotline should you see any type of intimidating or feel as if your ability to vote is being impeded.
Okay, next question. Can voter intimidation happen at a drop box, even if I've already completed my ballot? And what should I do if I see it?
Sure, it can happen at a drop box as well, because voter intimidation is not just at the polling location. It is about the process for you to be able to vote, which includes placing your absentee ballot into a drop box. So if you see activities that you may feel as intimidating, you can contact both the Election Protection Hotline, but you can also email us at misinformation@michigan.gov so that we can look into that as well.
Great. So our next question is, Keela, are poll watchers/challengers required to notify the clerk prior to election day that they will be in attendance, or do they just show up?
So the poll watchers, so we want to separate, those two categories of people, right? So there are challengers that are credentialed, either from a political party or a third party. The organizations themselves alert the local clerk's office that they will be there, but not the individuals themselves. So the individuals may not tell anyone about their appearance, but they will be credentials. People who are poll watchers also may not tell the local clerk's office that they'll be at specific polling locations. But those are two separate groups of people. So the challengers, we know which organizations will be represented, but not necessarily the individual people that will be representing them.
Okay. Next question. Can people with a license to carry a concealed weapon bring it to a polling place? Would this count as voter intimidation?
So as you may be familiar, in our state, there are several different entities that open up their doors to us to conduct elections. Some of them are schools or churches or other houses of worship. And they, according to state law, there may be prohibitions from bringing a concealed weapon into those locations already. And so for those types of polling locations, you may not be able to bring a concealed weapon. However, can it be intimidation? It's possible, right? But of course, we want you to feel safe and secure going to the polling location. So if you have any additional questions or concerns, you want to tell the chief elections inspector once you get inside, or you can consider calling law enforcement who may all anyway be patrolling the polling locations throughout Election Day.
Okay. Next question. If I'm awaiting sentencing for a felony, can I vote?
Yes, you can. Any resident who is confined to jail, county jail, who has not been sentenced can register and can vote in our state. So more easier. Anybody who is carrying out a sentence in jail or in prison cannot vote in our state. So long as you are not carrying out a sentence in jail or in prison, you are eligible to vote in Michigan. I think Neva might be frozen. If there are any other additional questions, feel free to put those into the chat for us. There was a question earlier about pre-processing. So I just want to clarify how pre-processing works. So again, when the elections inspectors who are participating with pre-processing, they will take the outer envelope and they will remove the secrecy envelope from that envelope. They will place the ballot secrecy envelope into an appropriate container after they have recorded the seal number in the poll book. And they look at, the ballot secrecy envelope and making sure that they have properly recorded, making sure that the signature was from the resident and any helper that assisted the resident as necessary was conducted, and then it's placed into the container. On both the Sunday and the Monday that pre-processing occurs, there is also a record of the number of envelopes that have been opened through pre-processing on both of those days. There's also an indication of whether or not the envelope was not signed and returned to the clerk's office, because there are other requirements for the clerk to alert residents who did not properly sign their envelope. And there's also a recording of the number of envelopes that were challenged during pre-processing as well. So those are the steps that has been outlined in law recently about how pre-processing will work this year.
Thanks, Keela. This is Sarah Reinhart, Director of Special Projects at the Department of State. While Neva is experiencing technical difficulties, I'm happy to continue feeding you some of the questions that we've received.
Okay.
So our next one actually has to do with pre-processing as well. Are all clerks required to pre-process?
No, there's actually a provision around who can pre-process. So it is clerks in cities and townships of more than 10,000 residents. So if you don't have at least 10,000 residents, you're not able to pre-process in the beginning. But if you do, you have to decide whether or not you want to pre-process this year, and you had to alert the Secretary of State that you want to pre-process by October 20th. And so there will be a list on our website of all of the jurisdictions that have elected to pre-process for this year.
Great. If I received a ballot because I asked to vote absentee and I decided to walk to my polling location instead, what should I do with my absentee ballot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we see that kind of often at our polling locations throughout the state. So you need to bring your ballot with you to the polling location. And there will be a couple of additional steps that you'll have to take before you're eligible to vote in person at your polling location. So the election inspector will have to call to your local clerk's office to ensure that you have not voted and to also be able to let them know that you are surrendering your absentee ballot to them. And once that is reconciled, then you can vote in your polling location. We do, just as an aside, know that a lot of folks will request an absentee ballot in order to kind of review the candidates and the proposals that are on the ballot. And so if that is what you're looking to do, you don't need to request an absentee ballot. You can just go to michigan.gov/vote and look at your sample ballot. It'll be right there online for you to look, and you can download it and print it. And that's the great way for you to be able to see who all will be on your ballot and do your research prior to showing up at the polls. So we want to make sure that you have that option as well.
Thanks, Keela. Next question is one that we get a lot. It is, how does straight ticket voting work for the general election?
Sure. So at the general election, you will see on the partisan area at the very top, it'll say straight ticket for the two major political parties. And you can just bubble in the straight ticket that you would like to do for whichever political party that you desire. And then you can move on to the nonpartisan portion of your ballot and any of the proposals that are on the ballot, or you can just be done right there. Should you want to split your ticket, meaning that you can bubble in for the straight ticket party, but there may be one or two offices that you that are on the partisan side that you may want to vote for someone in a different party. And you're absolutely free to do that as well. Or you can decide that you want to bubble in everything individually. That's also your choice. So you have many different ways to complete your ballot, but you do have the constitutional right to the straight ticket party, which will be at the very top of your ballot.
Thanks, Keela. And it looks like Neva has rejoined us. Neva, welcome back. We just finished all of the questions that were submitted prior to today's session, and now we can move on to the questions submitted live during today's session. I'll hand it back to you, Neva.
Thank you, Sarah. I apologize for that disappearance. So let's see. So for some of our questions, I don't know if I,
You're still cutting in and out a little bit, Neva.
I'm
It
not
looks like
seeing
you
any
might still be
questions.
having some technical difficulties. So I'm happy to ask Keela those questions for you. So the first question that we received.
yeah,
Yeah, not a problem. The first question that we received was about the 866-R vote number. Do those calls come locally into Michigan, or is it a national hotline?
It's kind of a hybrid of both, actually, Sarah. It is a national hotline, but it is piped back into local volunteers here in Michigan. So they are a group of legal volunteers that are there to answer your questions, that are very knowledgeable about the particularities of Michigan election law. And so they'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Great. And the next question is, can you share again the website or phone number to report misinformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website the email address that you can report issues is misinformation@michigan.gov, right there on the screen. And then the phone number that you can call, which is connected to that election protection hotline, is 866-OUR-VOTE. And there were other numbers for persons that are more proficient in additional languages besides English. So it's 888-839-8682 if you're wanting to call in Spanish, or 844-925-5286 for Arabic. And then 888-274-8683 for Asian and Pacific Islander in the languages of Bengali, Cantonese, Hindi, Korean, Mandarin, Tagalog, Urdu, and Vietnamese.
Great. Thank you for reading those out, Keela. So those are all the questions that we have today. I want to thank everyone for attending our session here. Don't forget to join us next Tuesday for our next session. And Neva, I believe maybe your technical difficulties have resolved, so I'll pass it off to you to sign off.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate all your help. And again, I apologize to our audience. As Sarah said, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, don't forget to sign up for next week's edition, where we'll be talking down to Election Day. Prepare to vote on November 8th. We have 2 weeks to the general election, so countdown starts now. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience with the technical difficulty, but those things happen sometimes. But until then, thank you so much. Take care, and you guys have a wonderful week. Thank you, Keela and Sarah.